It is 7 o'clock. Welcome to Zoom to Gettysburg. It's a program designed as a friendly informational discussion with LBGs, historians, authors, and guests. The Zoom program leaders and moderators require polite and courteous behavior of all participants. LBGs and invited presenters will make every effort to have accurate historical information. However, the information provided and group discussion may be subject to different interpretations. The information does not guarantee passing and or successful completion of any test, exam, class, and or course, including but not limited to the NPS Licensed Battlefield Guide test. Moderators reserve the right to limit discussions and comment. Zoom programs are recorded by attending. You give your permission to be recorded and possibly published in the future. Tracy's going to put up one more notice. For whatever reason, my computer won't let me do that tonight. I mean, I got to welcome back one of the co-founders of the Zoom to Gettysburg program, LBG Chris Army. I think your love is slipping a little bit south, but I like where you're going with all this stuff that you're doing. So, Chris, go ahead and take the screen, and once you have it, I think we're good to go.
Thanks, and thanks everybody for joining us for our Thursday night Zoom. We've been going on for more than a year now, and it seems like there's always something fun to talk about. And as we go through mid-May, we were coming up on the anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg and the anniversary of the campaign. So we thought we'd try a few things that are associated with the battle, of course, as we lead up to the anniversary. And what better place to start than the opening of the campaign itself with the Clash of Sabers, the Battle of Brandy Station. So just want to make a note here that this particular painting that you see is by artist Timothy Kurtz. It is used by permission. And he's got a couple of very, very nice paintings on his website, timkurtzpaintings.com. So I highly recommend you go check out some of the stuff that he's got there. So the idea tonight, we're not going to go really deep into all of the tactics of the battle, but thought it'd be a good idea to give you an overview and a chance to hear some of the events leading up into the largest cavalry battle in the American Civil War, as it turns out. But mostly, we want to give you a chance to hear from some of the participants in the battle. And for anybody who knows, the research that I've had the opportunity to dig into on Brandy Station, that research has involved a man by the name of Clark Bud Hall. Bud is probably the one preservationist for this land that the fight was over. The many acres, and many of those acres have been put into easement or actually purchased by the Civil War Trust. So thanks to the effort of Bud and early on Brian Pohanka, another preservationist who sadly is no longer with us. Early on, probably talking mid 1980s, they started to identify the land that this fight took over, or was over. And, they're very concerned because an industrial airport had been built right over the area where some of the fighting took place. So I think it can be solidly said that that runway covers the graves of some of the men that fought in this battle, which is truly a sad situation. But, if you ever get a chance to go down there and go on a tour with Bud, great. I highly recommend it. He's a wealth of knowledge, not only of the Battle of Brandy Station, but also Culpeper and the Winter Encampment, which I've done a program on as well. So it's been a great mentor to me, and I want to thank him for his mentoring of me and our fellow guides on this battle, on this fight. So what about Jeb Stuart? Well, a couple of interesting quotes about Jeb Stuart. This is all post Brandy Station and even post Civil War. So one of my favorite ones is Jeb Stuart was to blame. All of his enemies said that. The advance of the Army of Northern Virginia towards the Potomac in June of '63 would not have met that humiliating initial check if the chief of the cavalry had not been so intent on displaying his increased force. That comment is by none other than Douglas Southall Freeman and Lee's lieutenants. So a little bit of criticism, which is not always like Freeman, So kind of an interesting quote there. General Stuart was my ideal of a soldier. He was always cheerful under circumstances and always ready for any work and always reliable. Robert E. Lee talking to Wade Hampton after the war was over. Joe Johnson had a comment on Stuart. He is a rare man, wonderfully endowed by nature with the qualities necessary for an officer of light cavalry: calm, firm, acute, active, and enterprising. So who's the Stuart that we're going to see during this fight? And we'll kind of unfold that as we go along. But leading up to the opening of the Gettysburg campaign, of course, in the aftermath of Chancellorsville, Robert E. Lee is faced with organizing his army due to the death of Stonewall Jackson, one of his key commanders. So he must go from 2 corps to 3 corps. He has 2 brand new corps commanders in Richard Ewell and A.P. Hill. And one of the things that he also does is he consolidates all of his cavalry and his horse artillery and gives them to Jeb Stuart. So Jeb's now in charge of all of that, and he places the horse artillery under Major Robert Beckham. So he's got larger responsibilities as well. Now, as they are trying to figure out what is going on with the Union Army, of course, the Union Army is trying to figure out what's going on with the Army of Northern Virginia. And Hooker, Joseph Hooker, the commander of the Army of the Potomac at that time, gets to thinking that Stuart, based on some reconnaissance and some information that he's receiving, that Stuart is over towards Culpeper, Virginia. Hooker thinks that Stuart might be looking to sweep towards Washington, D.C. on one of his famous rides. He's actually going to do that about, I don't know, maybe 2.5 weeks after this fight. But Hooker wants to try to strike at him before Stuart gets a chance to do that. And so he will order his chief cavalry officer, a man by the name of Alfred Pleasanton, who has just replaced another cavalry officer named George Stoneman. Hooker's going to tell Pleasanton, I want you to go towards Culpeper and bust Stuart up before any sort of mischief gets underway. And all during this time, both sides are picketing along the Rappahannock fords. If you attended the winter encampment program that I did, there's all sorts of fords along the Rappahannock River. It's one of the most active rivers in the American Civil War, based on the fords being crossed. Fords like Germanna Ford, Kelly's Ford, Beverly's Ford, Norman's Ford, all sorts of different fords in and around the area. So on June 5th, shown here is an Alfred Woad sketch showing Union artillery shelling the rebel positions across the Rappahannock. And this is in advance of General John Sedgwick and his Sixth Corps. Go Nutmeggers, John Sedgwick. He prepares to cross the river to make a reconnaissance in force. And he doesn't get very far during that after this artillery barrage that Woad sketches. But they're trying to figure out what the Confederates are up to. And Joe Hooker is looking to find out why Lee's army is looking like they're preparing for a move. He's considering maybe they're looking to move into Maryland again, as they did in September of '62. Or is Lee looking to place his army between Hooker and Washington? So Joseph Hooker, the commander of the Army of the Potomac, is going to wire President Lincoln to notify him that he is of the opinion that it's my duty to pitch into the rear of Robert E. Lee. Now Lincoln tells him he's referring the matter to Halleck, General in Chief, for a response, but Lincoln also shares his view, and he uses some of his woodsy kind of humor in trying to get the message across to Hooker. And he tells him, should Lee move north, leaving behind a force at Fredericksburg, tempting you to fall upon it, do not take the bait. In one word, I would not take any risk of being entangled upon the river like an ox jumped half over a fence and liable to be torn by dogs front and rear, without a fair chance to gore one way or kick the other. If Lee would come to my side of the river, I would keep on the same side and fight him. So, in the meantime, Jeb Stuart's going to put on a show. This is a big event with the gathering of all of his brigades of cavalry, and he's around the Culpeper Courthouse on June 4th, and he decides that they're going to have the Sabers and Roses Ball at the Culpeper Courthouse. And then at 8 o'clock in the morning on June 5th, so the same day that Sedgwick is trying to cross the river, Jeb Stuart's going to hold his first grand review. As he makes his way to the reviewing stand with his staff, trumpeters herald is coming, and the women and girls lay flowers on his path. This going by of the horses in front of the reviewing stands is complete, as some of the men will make a charge against the Confederate cavalry on the other side of the field that is loaded with charges, but not any ordnance. And as the cannons are firing away at the men charging them, ladies will swoon. Major Henry McClellan of Stuart's staff will later on write, "It was a brilliant day, and the thirst for the pomp and circumstances of war was fully satisfied." It's interesting to note that Union General John Buford was aware of this grand review. In fact, he makes a note of the fact that he could hear the cannon firing, but that it wasn't an attack. Buford had been tipped off, apparently, that there was going to be this grand review. Buford, in the same report, will also report that Hood's men have made it to Raccoon Ford, which is on the lower river in Culpeper, the Rapidan River, but no reports of Confederate infantry moving north of the river at this time. Now, General Lee had been invited to this soiree, but he had a few more pressing matters. After all, he's planning his move to the north. He's trying to figure out what the Union Army is up to. He's looking at getting Ewell on the way. So he's got a lot of things on his mind, but he will attend the next review that Jeb Stuart does, which is on June 8th. You can imagine all of the response of the cavalrymen that now had to shine everything up again, get all the horses cleaned up again, and do the thing all over again. There was a lot of grumbling apparently in the troops having to deal with that, and much was made of this military foppery, as it was called. Now, somebody that shows up to see this is John Bell Hood, who was invited to come along with a few of his friends. Well, a few of his friends end up being his entire division. And Hood's Texans are lining the edges of the field. Union Cavalry Officer Fitzhugh Lee will tell Hood, "Don't let them halloo. Here's your mule at the review." Seems like any mishap in horsemanship would promptly draw that from the infantry. And usually it came with a verse or two of the favorite army song. And here's how the song went. "A farmer came to camp one day with milk and eggs to sell, upon a mule which oft would stray to where no man could tell. The farmer, tired of his tramp, for hours was made a fool by everyone he met in camp with Mr. Here's Your Mule." Now, Wade Hampton seconded Fitzhugh's plea to General Hood, and he told him if Hood's division set upon that shout, the cavalry, Hampton promised laughingly, would charge them. So we have Hood reviewing this, and they are having some fun along the way. And Robert E. Lee is going to be in attendance on this one, and will later on comment. He writes to his wife that he observed it proudly. "I reviewed the cavalry in this section today. It was a splendid sight. The men and horses looked well. They have recuperated since last fall. Stuart was in all his glory. Your sons and nephews were well and flourishing." Well, Stuart's glory, drew smiling and understanding comment from Robert E. Lee. But like I said, others called it military foppery. And, the Richmond gossip going all around was that Jeb and his officers were rollicking, and running after girls. After all, what soldier given a chance wouldn't? But one Culpeper lady, and we have to suspect that she was not invited to the dance, will end up writing to Jefferson Davis. And she writes, President, allow a rude Southern lady to say General Stuart's conduct since in Culpeper is perfectly ridiculous. Having repeated reviews for the benefit of his lady friends, he riding up and down the line thronged with those ladies, he decorated with flowers, apparently a monkey show on hand, and he the monkey. In fact, General Stuart is nothing more or less than one of those fops, devoting his whole time to his lady friends' company. Well, you can imagine that after this second review, that the men were tired. They had gone through 2 of these reviews, which involved a lot of preparation, and Jeb Stuart will go to bed that night with orders to start to cross the river and move north. Now, one of the benefits to all of this military foppery in the Culpeper area was that Jeb Stuart had most of his 10,000 horsemen consolidated near Brandy Station. And that is going to actually come in and surprise the Union side, as well as be surprised by the Union side. So, we talk a lot about the Battle of Gettysburg being a surprise. Well, this particular fight is very much a surprise based on the information that they have on the next day. So the overall battle plan looks like this. Alfred Pleasanton, here he is shown in a nice color version. Probably not be said of Alfred Pleasanton that he was full of integrity. We'll see towards the end, he does kind of puff himself up. He likes to puff himself up to the papers, and always seems to make a lot more bigger deal about his participation in things, but more on that later. But his conversation with Joseph Hooker and the orders that he receives are to disperse and destroy the rebel force assembled in the vicinity of Culpeper, destroy his trains and supplies of all description to the utmost of your ability. In other words, go in there and bust General Stuart up. Well, the plan was pretty ambitious. Calls for 2 wings comprised of nearly 10,000 Union horsemen, attempting to coordinate a river crossing of the Rappahannock at both Kelly's Ford and 6 or 7 miles north in Beverly's Ford. So if it could be accomplished, the Union troopers are to cross. They are to head towards Culpeper, where they believe that the bulk of the cavalrymen are, the Confederate cavalrymen, head towards Culpeper and bust them up. So if it can be accomplished, this would really give them the chance, give the Union boys a chance to foil their cavalry arch nemesis, Jeb Stuart. And this is the largest operation undertaken by a force of Union cavalry, which had only really been recently unified to that point in the war. Now, overall, the plan was pretty good, based on intelligence, though, that wasn't fully accurate. Now, one of the problems with the plan, and I think we see a little bit of this happen in Pickett's charge as well, when 2 units are supposed to unite and head towards the angle. The problem is the amount of ground that they have to cover before they meet up. Buford basically goes straight across and down the road heading towards Fleetwood Hill, but Gregg has farther to go, and he's supposed to meet up near Brandy Station at the same time Buford gets there. So there's no coordination of timing. Things are supposed to get started about 4:30 in the morning, and we're going to see some other things happen that really cause some problems on both sides. But that's the overall plan: cross the river, consolidate, and go bust up Jeb Stuart. So here's a little bit different view of the attack plan. So you have Buford up crossing Beverly Ford, heading towards Brandy Station, and Gregg heading up there to meet him. And one of the divisions, which we'll learn a little bit more about under Alfred Duffier, a Frenchman, will head down towards Stevensburg with the idea of coming at Culpeper from the southeast. So the orders are to quietly mass the troops on the north side of the river, Buford at Beverly Ford, Gregg at Kelly's Ford, got this two-wing plan. Now Buford has his division, the Cavalry Reserve Brigade, and a brigade of infantry under Delbert Ames. You might know that name from Gettysburg. In fact, you're going to recognize, if you're a Gettysburg student, you'll recognize some of the infantry units that will be involved in this fight. David Gregg has his 3rd Division and Colonel Alfred Duffierd's 2nd Division, plus infantry brigade of David Russell. So when all is said and done, just under 8,000 horsemen and 3,000 infantry. And they're supposed to join at the railroad near Brandy Station. It's 4 miles for Buford, 8 for Gregg, and then head another 6 miles down towards Culpeper. So right wing, here's John Buford. He's got a brigade under Grimes Davis, a brigade under Thomas Devon, and a reserve brigade, mostly U.S. regulars, with the exception of the 6th Pennsylvania Cavalry under Major Charles Whiting. He has a Delbert Ames, and he has 3 batteries of artillery. On the left wing, David M. Gregg. He's got Colonel Alfred Duffierd's 2nd Division, a couple of brigades there. Gregg's own division has Judson Kilpatrick and Colonel Percy Wyndham's brigade, and the attached infantry of David Russell. In addition, sprinkled out through all of that, you have various artillery units. Okay, so what's going on with the Confederates? Well, Lee had told Stuart, take the lead cavalry division across the Rappahannock and screen the northward march of the Army of Northern Virginia as Ewell starts to move north. So, in order to do this, Stuart has posted Grumble Jones and all of his artillery, all of Stuart's artillery under Beckham, on the south side of Beverly Ford. The 6th Virginia is posted on picket duty near the river. The artillery is positioned to make a crossing the next day. They're not really positioned in any sort of military alignment. One of the quotes that I found from one of Beckham's gunners is kind of cool. It says, West Pointers may know all about the theoretical probabilities and intricacies of war, but I think that for the last few nights, the horse artillery has been permitted to roost a little too near the lion's den. So some of these gunners are a little nervous with how they're posted. Stuart is going to post Beverly Robertson's troops southwest of Brandy on the same farm where they had the grand review, the John Minor Botts farm, with some pickets near Kelly's Ford. They will regather up during the fight. They're going to ultimately stall, but they're not going to be able to block Gregg's route, as we'll see in the fighting a little bit later. Fitzhugh Lee's brigade, now under Tom Munford, because Fitz Lee is being having a bout of rheumatism, so he's not going to be in this fight. As it turns out, he's at Stark's Ford. Rooney Lee, Robert E. Lee's middle son, is guarding Welford's Fort and located a place called Farley. And Farley, during the winter encampment, will be General John Sedgwick's headquarters. Wade Hampton, another Confederate cavalry officer, is camped between Brandy Station and Stevensburg. Now, on the evening of June 8th, Confederate Captain Dan Grimsley of the 6th Virginia Cavalry was in charge of protecting the bridge along the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. Sensing something was going on, he puts his ear to the tracks and he came to the conclusion that some noise that he was able to hear was Union wagons, likely artillery, making their way to get into position to come across the Rappahannock River. Captain Grimsley would report his concerns to his commander, William Grumble Jones, shown in the middle here. The concern was pretty much dismissed. Therefore, it's pretty likely that Captain Grimsley may have been one of the few, if not the only Confederates, aware that there could be an attack the next morning. Now, the morning phase where the fight opens, about 4:30 in the morning, Union cavalry were told no campfires that night. They were woken up about 2 o'clock to get ready for the day's work. No noise, no striking of matches. Try not to do anything that's going to alert the Confederate pickets that the Union boys are on the other side of the river. Buford's orders are to brigade leader, Colonel Benjamin Grimes Davis, cross the river. It's about 3.5 feet at the time, deep. advance in a column of force, clear out any Confederate pickets that you see. The weather is described by a lot of the participants as mist, kind of rising up from the river, enveloping the area. So, kind of a misty morning, if you will. Now, picketing along this area are men of Company A of the 6th Virginia, and there's two brothers by the name of Fleet and Bob James. Now, they're mounted, they're on duty, they're on their horses, and in this very foggy weather condition, at first, everything's really quiet. Now, later on, they're going to be able to hear the sabers of the Union horsemen. But while it's quiet, Fleet writes later on that he could hear his horse's heart beating. In fact, he and his brother are watching the ears of the horses, and every now and then, the ears of the horses go straight up. Usually a horse will do that if they know that there's some sort of danger or something going on that humans might not either hear or see, but the horses can. And so they see this happening and they're wondering what's going on. Now, the James brothers will be the first that, kind of make contact as the Union boys are crossing. And they're going to start to fire towards the riders, but mostly fire in the air in order to alert the rest of Company A of the 6th Virginia farther back that, hey, there's something going on here. Now, when Captain Bruce Gibson, of the captain of Company A, he hears all this, he's going to shout to his men, and they're getting woken up, going to shout to his men, "Stay cool, boys, but shoot to kill." Now, the Union boys are going to draw their sabers as they cross. 600 men of the 8th New York, led by Major Edmund Pope. Then behind them, the 8th Illinois, then the 3rd Indiana. And there's going to be volleys with the 6th Virginia Cavalry to greet them as they cross. Benjamin Grimes Davis, the Union commander in charge of this part of the attack, is wearing a Mexican shawl, and he's going to shout, "Charges, foragers, boys." The pickets will withdraw slowly, giving the rest of the 6th Virginia time to resist along the Beverly Ford Road, which you can see on the other side of this fence. Although it's a bit overgrown now, than it was back then. Now, the first man to fall in this fight is a man by the name of Henry C. Cutler, born in 1837. He enlists in Avon, Livingston County, New York on September 10th, 1861. He's the first lieutenant of Company B of the 8th New York Cavalry. Cutler was the first Union soldier killed at the outset of the Pennsylvania campaign, shortly after crossing the Rappahannock River on June 9th, 1863, at Beverly's Ford. The regimental historian of the 8th New York wrote, "The first volley fired took effect on Lieutenant Cutler, the ball striking him in the neck and killing him almost instantly. He was commissioned a captain posthumously on June 23rd, 1863, to date to December 1st, 1862. His remains were taken home, and he's buried at Avon Cemetery in Avon, Livingston County, New York." So first to fall. Now, the other men of the 6th Virginia have been alerted. There's a Confederate Major Cable Florney of the 6th Virginia. He's able to gather about 150 men, most of whom had been sleeping, very surprised by the attack. One of the members of one of the Confederate batteries recorded, "Just at daylight, bullets fresh from Yankee sharpshooters came from the depths of the woods and zipped across our blanket beds. And then such a getting up of horse artillerymen I never saw before." Now, obviously, they're concerned about this artillery park, knowing that they're vulnerable. So many of the men will go to horse, the 6th Virginia on the right, the 7th Virginia near them go on the left. Many are riding bareback, many are partially dressed. And they're going to set up a staunch resistance on that Beverly Ford Road, but increasing pressure from Buford's men is starting to push them back. Now, as Davis's men get close to a spurt of woods along the road, the firing increases from the Confederates and slows the Federal boys down. Now you have close combat, saber slashes, pistol firing, and this allows many of the Confederates to work their way back to the next part of the line where they will regroup on a line called St. James Church, and we're going to talk about that here soon. Now, Grimes Davis finds himself pretty much alone in the middle of the road, and he turns and yells to his men, "Stand firm, 8th New York." And turning back, he sees a Confederate who had seen Grimes Davis and starts coming after him. Davis will swing his saber, but he's going to miss. Lieutenant Robert Owen Allen of the 6th Virginia ducks and then fires his pistol at Davis, killing him instantly. Now, one account says that Robert Owen Allen only had 3 shots left. Another account says he only had 1 shot. Either way, he doesn't have a lot of chances, and he really made it work for him because he kills Davis instantly. So, Robert Owen Allen, he is a 2nd lieutenant in Company D of the 6th Virginia, born in Clark County, Virginia, in November of 1833. He is in Stuart's 1st Virginia Cavalry, but then transfers to the 6th on September 15th of 1861. Let's see, Sergeant John B. Stone and a Private LaRue, either Christopher or Gilbert, the record's not real clear on that, rode to Allen's support. Colonel Davis is going to swipe at Allen with that saber. He's going to miss. Allen, it was said, also avoided by throwing himself on the side of his horse. So some pretty good trick riding there. In one continuous motion, Allen will put the pistol up to Davis's head and pull the trigger. In a heap, Davis drops to the roadway, mortally wounded. The young lieutenant was known until the day that he died in 1918 for his grim, heroic deed that Saturday at Brandy Station. Now, there's another man named Enos Parsons, 2nd lieutenant of 8th New York Cavalry, and he's born in 1840. He's a clerk before the war starts. He enlists in 62. He becomes 2nd lieutenant of Company K. He's serving as Davis's adjutant by the summer of 63. And he wrote that Colonel Davis, who was gallantly leading the advance, turned to rally them and waving his sword to the 8th Illinois shouted, "Come on, boys," when a rebel rode out in front of him and fired 3 shots from his pistol at him, the last one taking effect in his forehead and inflicting a mortal wound. Quick as thought, Lieutenant Parsons acting, he will be at the side of who he thinks is Allen, pretty quick, raising in his stirrups, and with one well-directed blow of his saber, he laid the head open midway between the eyes and chin, and the wretch fell dead in the dust at the horse's feet. The man Parsons killed, however, was Sergeant John B. Stone. It was not Robert Allen. After Brandy Station, Parsons continues to rise in rank. He'll serve on Pleasanton's staff, later on General Sheridan's staff. He's breveted lieutenant colonel. He marries after the war. He's involved in a malting business in Sodus, New York. He becomes president of the Rochester Driving Park Association and becomes the director of the North Central Railroad. He and his wife attained such high affluence that they wintered at the Biltmore Estate in North Carolina. And that is where the colonel will die in 1897. He's buried in Mount Hope Cemetery in Rochester, New York. Now here's a post Brandy Station photo showing Pleasanton here in the middle and his staff. And here is Enos Parsons here, second from the left in the front. And for Gettysburg aficionados, and perhaps if there's a few little Bighorn aficionados, 2 men above him, this man right here is none other than George Yates, who will bring an order to George Armstrong Custer at East Cavalry Field on July 3rd, 1863 at the Battle of Gettysburg. And he will later on in 1876 die with General George Armstrong Custer out at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Now, all of this sadness with Benjamin Grimes, Buford will write later on that success was dearly bought, for among the noble and brave ones who fell that day was Colonel B.F. Davis, 8th New York Cavalry. He died in the front, giving examples of heroism and courage to all who were to follow. So, I have another great sketch here. I believe this is a road sketch, but this shows the columns, the charging columns after they've crossed the river heading towards St. James Church. So you are looking south towards the ridge, which contains St. James Church. Modern day view of it looks like this. Now imagine trying to interpret this had there been houses or even further airports built here. In fact, at one point in time, there was even an Indy Formula 500 racetrack that was proposed for this area. So folks, again, can't thank Bud Hall enough. Here's a picture of Bud. Um, can't thank him enough for his help in helping to save this land so that we can interpret it. And in Bud's possession, and what he's holding up here, is one of the very few known sketches that we have of St. James Church. I don't believe any photos were ever taken of St. James Church. It will be destroyed, if I'm not mistaken, during the winter encampment for the bricks to be used. So you can, if you wander in this area, which is part of the Civil War Trust's property now, you can still see some of the graves that are there. And some of the graves even of men that had fought over some of this ground previously in 1862. Now, Stuart's horsemen are going to suffer pretty heavily during this initial onslaught, but they do buy enough time to bring some artillery. And some of the first artillery to respond is one gun of Hart, South Carolina battery, who's going to get into the Beverly Ford Road and start firing canister, which is going to slow down the Union advance. Now, with his position in a little bit of peril, Buford's going to order a desperate charge on that Confederate battery. The 6th New York, the 6th Pennsylvania leads an assault with the 6th U.S. Cavalry close behind. It seems like for most of the forces here at the Battle of Brandy Station, you just have to remember the number 6. Undeterred by that canister and shrapnel, the Union horsemen will end up overrunning the guns before Grumble Jones will bring the rest of his boys up, and they are able to push the Union boys back. So Jones is going to call it the 11th and 12th Virginian, the 35th Battalion, to support those guns, all while this is going on. So this melee of fighting, is just back and forth. Now, along the now solid gun line on St. James Church, there will also be attacks from Tom Devon's brigade, including the 8th and 9th New York, the 3rd Indiana Cavalry, the 3rd West Virginia, and they are ultimately all repulsed as more and more Confederates are showing up on line. So the Confederate line is going to start to swell as Confederates are starting to respond to this. But a lot of these units, if you've studied cavalry in Gettysburg, ought to sound pretty familiar to you. Now, Jeb Stuart will make it on the scene. There's going to be a little bit of lull in the fighting. In fact, several of his young staff officers will climb a cherry tree, and they're throwing some of that ripe fruit down to Stuart and some other generals around him. And a shell is going to come into the tree, splintering branches, sending the cherry pickers all plunging down to the ground. And Stuart roars with laughter. "What's the matter, boys? Cherry's getting sour?" he asked them. Well, upon arriving, Stuart had ordered Fitzlee to move to the front, Hampton to go to Jones's right, Rooney Lee to take a position on the left. In fact, Rooney Lee is going to take an excellent position along what's called U Ridge, west of Fleetwood Hill, running down towards the Hazel River. And we'll talk about that fighting here shortly. Now, Confederate lines extending, as I said, it's swelling up, and it's actually going beyond Buford's flanks, and it's starting to spell trouble for the Union forces. But Stuart's now getting reports of Yankees at Fleetwood Hill. And couriers are coming in from Grumble Jones, relaying a warning from Robertson's pickets, Beverly Robertson's pickets, that Federal troopers are on the march from Kelly's Ford. And General Stuart's going to reply, "Tell General Jones to attend to the Yankees in his front, and I'll watch the flanks." So the courier goes back and tells Jones this message. Jones reply, "So he thinks they ain't coming, does he? Well, let him alone. He'll damn soon see for himself." Now, about noon, another courier rides up from Major Henry McClellan at Cavalry headquarters on Fleetwood Hill. He reports that a Federal column is approaching Brandy Station and the rear of the gun line at St. James. In other words, Stuart, you're in trouble. And Stuart will reply, "Ride back there and see what this foolishness is all about." And as that happens, a second courier rides up with another report of the Federals approaching Brandy. There's a man on Stuart's staff named Frank Robertson. And he wrote later on, "The only time in my 14 months of service with General Stuart that he seemed rattled was when he was told the Yankees were at Brandy." Well, who are these Union men coming towards Fleetwood Hill? This is Union General David McMurtry Gregg. And meanwhile, there are delays that are plaguing David Gregg's Federal horsemen at Kelly's Ford. Here's a picture of Kelly's Ford. Gregg's scouting had alerted him to the presence of the Confederates in his front. These are Beverly Robertson's men. And so how he's going to respond is he's going to make a wide march around them. And it's about 11:30 before Gregg is actually able to reach Brandy Station, sometime 11:30 to 12. But now he is firmly behind the Confederates. So this is problematic for the Confederates. And as we see here, the fight for Fleetwood Hill, we'll see a couple of pictures of Fleetwood Hill. Folks, there's a couple of maps on the Civil War Trust site, America's Battlefield Trust. One map is of before and after, the land that had been saved in 1987, and now the land that had been preserved, I think just a matter of a couple of years ago. I think the latest map was updated in 2019. So Gregg's path to St. James Church is blocked by Fleetwood Hill. So he can't get to where he needs to meet John Buford. Fleetwood Hill, it's a broad elevation. Stuart had established his headquarters there. It's a beautiful hill. In fact, up until not too long ago, in the past 5 or 6 years, a developer had bought Fleetwood Hill and put up a huge house on it. And one of the best preservation efforts that have taken place was the purchase of that house and thus tearing it down and returning the land to the way that it looked during the time of the battle. So when Gregg gets into place, he opens up with Union artillery, and this gives a considerable shock to Stuart, whose main force had been committed in his front down in St. James Church. Excuse me. Gregg's preparatory barrage, though, gave Stuart a little bit of time to pull the troops back, some of the troops back to Fleetwood Hill to meet up with the first Union charge. So this is Fleetwood Hill here. As you can see, it's a prominent hill. In fact, you can see it from several different locations all around Culpeper. You can see it from Clark's Mountain and Pony Mountain, 2 observation points. From here, you can see all the way out towards Stevensburg. So very, very prominent area. And here's where that house stood once upon a time. Now, some of the men that are going to fight for Fleetwood Hill. On the left is Sir Percy Wyndham, Union soldier. He is a British soldier of fortune, knighted for his service, actually with Garibaldi. Hey, Garibaldi. There's a shout out to Garibaldi. Spectacular mustache, doesn't he? Wears his medals from various European armies. Kind of a, really interesting looking figure. Love the mustache, keeps it all pruned up like that, preened up. To his right, or his left, our right, is Hugh Judson Kilpatrick. Kilpatrick was his nickname. Now, Confederate Major Henry McClellan, the one who had sent the message to Stuart about, Yankees getting close to Fleetwood, he is utterly astonished to see this long column of the enemy approaching. He cannot understand how Confederate General Beverly Robertson could even let him pass. Now, Robertson reported that the enemy was there, but apparently he had taken his orders literally. He had blocked the road that he was supposed to, but he didn't bother to try to stop Gregg from going around him as they took alternate routes. So Beverly Robertson, not such a good showing for him that day. McClellan is going to position the only gun he has, a 6-pound howitzer that had pulled out of the St. James fight and made its way back to Fleetwood. He uses the few remaining shots, the shells and that he has against Percy Wyndham. And Wyndham responds by stopping the attack, pulling his artillery forward, then deploying for an assault on Fleetwood. And this gives the Confederates time to get more men up on top of Fleetwood Hill. The 12th Virginia and the 35th Virginia Battalion, they're going to show up in the nick of time to help thwart that Federal attack. And the Confederates are going to be able to hold until Wade Hampton shows up with more rebel riders to help out. Walter Taylor, Lee's adjutant, wrote home about this part of the fight. Such charging and yelling was never before witnessed and heard on this continent. We occupied a range of hills with large tracts of cleared fields in every direction, and whichever way the eye turned, you could see squadrons charging squadrons and whole regiments rushing like a whirlwind towards the opposing force and meeting with shock that fairly shook the earth. Wyndham is going to go down with a wound during these charges and countercharges. Now, David M. Gregg, who is pretty much normally a stoic guy by all accounts, he is seen riding his horse at a gallop, swinging his gauntlets over his head and hurrahing. So he's trying to rally the troops to keep going. Now it's Kilpatrick's turn. Kilpatrick, he's going to try to send basically from the southeast 2 New York regiments in, but they're quickly broken up one after another and sent flying. He will turn to Colonel Calvin Doughty of the 1st Maine. What can you do with your regiment, he asks. I can drive the rebels to hell, sir. And the Maine troopers will move forward to honor that colonel's pledge. They will ride to the crest. They will go straight through 2 of Wade Hampton's regiments and keep going for over a mile until they approach a house called the Barber House, still stands today. Who's there? Robert E. Lee, General Ewell, their staffs, Jed Hotchkiss, the map maker. Jed Hotchkiss is going to note in his diary that Ewell, as they saw these Downeasters coming up, had said to Robert E. Lee, well, we can gather in the house and defend it to the last. There won't be any need for doing that, though, because the Downeasters are going to turn aside, apparently not realizing the prize that lay ahead. So no defense of the Barber House became necessary. With no reserves left, David Gregg must withdraw, but no connection being made with Buford or with Dufay from the south. Meanwhile, over on the right, the place that we now call Buford's Knoll, again, this land is preserved. You can hike out to it and you can see the view, which we have a picture here, the view looking towards what's called the Cunningham Farm, which will be an attack that's going to be made against Rooney Lee's troops. But this is the knoll looking north, kind of to the right, all the way over to the southwest. So beautiful view from up there. In fact, Bud Hall tells the story that when Sam Elliott was studying, General Buford, as he was getting into character, he made a visit to Brandy Station, and he stood on the very top of this knoll. And Bud has a rather humorous story about Sam Elliott really trying to get into that character and wanted to stand exactly where John Buford stood. So Bud had to point that out to him, which who knows? I mean, look at the size of the land. But Sam Elliott got to stand exactly where John Buford stood. But look at that view. So Rooney Lee had been ordered from their camp near Farley to take a position along a stone wall on the left side of the Confederate line. So as this line swells, he basically has the northern part of it. Now, Harvard educated, Rooney Lee is going to meet some Harvard boys from the 2nd Mass Infantry, led by none other than Charles Mudge. Remember his Gettysburg story? It's not murder, but it's the order. Charles Mudge will be involved in this fight that day. Companies from the 2nd Mass and 3rd Wisconsin will join in what's going to end up being a dismounted fight. Buford is going to begin a series of probing attacks starting about 8:30. He's going to be pushing the Confederates back slowly. And when they reach the Green Farm, there's going to be some counterattacks from behind one of the stone walls. Now, Buford's going to ask the 3rd Wisconsin Infantry to drive the Confederates out. The commander looks, a man by the name of Captain George W. Stevenson. He estimates he might be able to get around them and flank them, but Confederates have twice their numbers. Buford states to him, mind, I don't order you, but if you think you can do it, go in. Stevenson will take 10 marksmen. They're going to crawl to a position so that they can shoot down the length of the line. They're going to surprise the Confederates, who will abandon that wall and fall back. And by now you have that heavy gunfire coming from Brandy, coming from Fleetwood Hill. And this is not so great news for the Confederates. And Rooney Lee is going to start to withdraw southward along U Ridge to a more commanding position on the northwest end of Fleetwood Hill. Now, when the mounted fighting starts back up, and during the back and forth, Rooney Lee is going to be wounded in the leg with a saber slash and taken out of the Gettysburg campaign. So a view of U Ridge here, looking towards the easternmost stone wall that figured prominently in this fight. Involves the 2nd Mass and 3rd Wisconsin of Ames Brigade. And this is U Ridge in the distance here. So With the guns back in action, Buford now sought to reach them by moving around the Confederate left flank on U Ridge, dismounted troopers, repulsed repeated attacks from behind those stone walls. They're going to be dislodged around noon. Now, being a cavalry fight, folks, the timing is all kind of odd. It's a lot of fighting over the course of the day, so it's somewhat difficult to line up some of the accounts. But the Confederates, as they withdraw, they're holding Buford's now really tired guys at bay, which allows Stuart to shuffle more and more troops to face Gregg. So back and forth for almost 5 hours. Now, later on, hearing reports of incoming Confederate reinforcements, General Pleasanton will ultimately withdraw about 5 o'clock, withdraw back across the river, at least issue orders to do so. And Stuart's not going to pursue. But what about the troops under Alfred Duffier? Well, he was to head to Culpeper via Stevensburg, down below here. Remember the plan? Stevensburg head up towards Culpeper, where they were supposed to run into the Confederates, but they didn't. Duffier is late getting started. Now, you've taken the wrong road, counter-marched. Gosh, that sounds like Gettysburg. It's 9 o'clock in the morning before all of Gregg's troops are across the river and moving. And as I mentioned, Beverly Robertson's Confederate troopers are going to offer little or no resistance. They do report the movement to Stuart. So Stuart's aware the Union guys are coming, but Gregg had some reconnaissance done, and he had ascertained that the Confederates were on the main road, and he simply takes routes around Beverly Robertson. Gregg will turn off to fight at Fleetwood, and as we've already discussed, and the fighting is going to die down on Fleetwood, Gregg still has not heard from Duffier. As lead elements arrive in Stevensburg sometime after 8 o'clock, led by the 6th Ohio Cav. Again, there's a number 6. Message is sent to Duffier that the 6th has run into some light skirmishing as they're looking for routes in Culpeper. Duffier tells the 6th to hold the village of Stevensburg until he can get there. Now, the 2nd South Carolina Cavalry is going to leave their reserve position in an effort to block this Union Cav from discovering Confederate infantry, Ewell and Longstreet in particular, who are now near Culpeper. So they are going to ride out to meet the 6th Ohio. With them will be Lieutenant Colonel Frank Hampton, leading some of the men as they skirmish with the 6th Ohio. 6th Ohio is going to withdraw eastward towards Stevensburg. Duffier shows up and he starts to place his troops, and now there's fighting because Confederates have dismounted and now taken cover in and around the road. As this fighting intensifies south of Haynesborough's Ridge, Frank Hampton is going to take a pistol ball in the stomach and a saber cut to his face. Reeling from his saddle, he's mortally wounded. The fighting intensifies, but only lasts a few minutes as the rest of Hampton's men scatters. As they do, they run into Colonel William Wickham's 4th Virginia, the Black Horse Regiment. This Southern horse regiment had been sent in, but now with the fallback of the South Carolinians, it's going to create a lot of confusion and panic. Duffier will continue to push forward as the Confederates are assuming a new position along Norman's Mill, which is on a small run called Mountain Run. And Duffier can see the fighting over at Fleetwood Hill, but he kind of mounts a lethargic effort to break through the Confederates to go assist. Now, one of the heroes in this is Lieutenant Alexander C.M. Pennington and his Battery M 2nd U.S. Artillery, and he is going to carry on most of the fight on his own, from a higher position along a mountain road. And Pennington, later on, as he fights in East Cav Field, it will be said of him by none other than George Armstrong Custer that much of the success of the Union victory at Gettysburg can be given to Pennington, Lieutenant Pennington. I will maintain that much of the success of this part of the fight of the Battle of Brandy Station can also be attributed to Pennington's abilities as an artillerist. So here's a picture of Mountain Run and a couple people to talk about here. are William Downs Farley. He is a captain on General Jeb Stuart's staff. He's born in December of 1835 in South Carolina, son of Southern aristocracy. He graduates from the University of Virginia and practices law. He enlists as a private in the 1st South Carolina in 61, and he becomes aide de camp for General Bonham before joining the staff of Jeb Stuart. And he becomes Jeb Stuart's chief scout. At Brandy Station, only a few short days before, the much admired, respected Farley had handed his new Confederate overcoat to a Culpeper lady. I assume that was at one of those balls. But he has one request. If anything befalls me, wrap me in this and send me to my mother. He told the lady. Now, the lady's identity is unknown and may forever be unknown. We don't know who she was. On June 9th, Colonel Matthew C. Butler was conferring with Farley when a Yankee shell fired from Haynesborough's Ridge explodes nearby. Farley's right leg is severed and Butler laid severely wounded. Butler's wound will necessitate the amputation of his right foot, although he will eventually return to action. Laying there bleeding to death, Farley will ask John Rhett to bring him his severed leg. He took it, Rhett would later write, and pressed it to his bosom as one would a child and said, smiling, "It is an old friend, gentlemen, and I do not wish to part from it." He died later that evening. Of Farley, Stuart later lamented in his official report that he displayed, even in death, the same loftiness of bearing and fortitude which have characterized him through life. No nobler champion has fallen. He was interred at the Fairview Cemetery in Culpeper. His remains were exhumed in 2002 and, per his wish, taken home to Lawrence, South Carolina. So a monument that they have for this part of the fight is near a park. You can see the area of the park up behind this monument, and then here is William Downs Farley's grave. So, remembering the Civil War in Culpeper County. Dan Grimsley, captain of Company B. Remember we talked about him. He was the one that had put his ear to the railroad track and heard the wagons going by. Well, he was born in April of 1840 in Rappahannock County, Virginia. He passed his boyhood days upon his father's farm. At the age of 20, when the first call for troops is made upon the war, he enlists as a private and is going to serve his state throughout the 4 years of war. Soon after his enlistment, he's elected first lieutenant and within a few days made captain and later on major and lieutenant colonel of the 6th Virginia Cavalry, to which the Rappahannock Company belonged. At the close of the war, Major Grimsley commenced the study of law. He's admitted to the bar in 1867 and starts practicing law in Culpeper. He rose rapidly in his profession. He takes a position in the front rank. He's elected to state senate in 1869. He's there until 1879. In 1880, he's appointed judge of the 6th, now the 9th Judicial Circuit. In 1885, he represented Culpeper County in the state legislature. And in 1886, again elected judge, remaining upon the bench until his death in 1910. He was a man of the highest type of character and citizen of lofty patriotism. And throughout his life, he will take an active part in the work and devotion to his church. His death was deeply felt wherever he was known, and the comrades of A.P. Hill Camp, United Confederate Veterans of Culpeper, as well as that of his church, expressed their esteem in his memorial tributes in 1910. Now, a visitor to Culpeper on November 2nd and 3rd, 1902, is none other than President Theodore Roosevelt. Seen here with Secretary of War Elihu Root, and this is Judge Grimsley right here. So, there's some pretty cool accounts of Theodore Roosevelt's visit to the Culpeper area, and Teddy, being a very good politician, will kind of walk the line. Of course, being a New Yorker, he's not a Southerner, but he will walk the line between both the North and the South, and Northern states and Southern states, as well as Democrats and Republicans. And being a a man who, always wanted to be at the front of things anyway, and served in the Spanish-American War, was pleased to have Dan Grimsley take him around the battlefields of Cedar Mountain and Brandy Station. And by the way, Dan Grimsley, folks, he is the John Batchelder of Cedar Mountain. So a lot of the locations that were marked and the markers that were placed on that battlefield were done under his direction. So Roosevelt, when he comes there, he wants to meet him. And they will go to what is now known as Beauregard. Back then, it was known as the Barber House. Remember, that's where Robert E. Lee is watching the fight that's going on at Fleetwood Hill. So they will visit that site. Here's a picture of Dan Grimsley's grave. Very unassuming. So, what does all this mean to the Gettysburg campaign? Well, we'll let the troopers tell you. A Confederate trooper, said of the Union, at Brandy Station, the Union cavalry gained confidence in themselves, had now emerged, and had become foemen worthy of our steel. From Confederate perspective, General Lee did not regard the Battle of Brandy Station as a serious threat to the continuance of his operations, but he wanted to ascertain on June 10th whether the Federals might desire to return for another go at his cavalry, and they did not so desire it. Now, Confederates, they managed to prevent the Union cavalry from learning the intentions of Robert E. Lee. So from that perspective, it's kind of a win on the Confederate side, and Lee will begin that march of his infantry into the Shenandoah Valley to invade the North. Now, Pleasanton, he is going to, after this fight, suggest that Stuart had 30,000 horsemen and were fully aware of the Union plans, and that it wasn't his orders to destroy and break up Stuart's troops, but that his was a reconnaissance in force. That's the term that he used. And that he had captured the camp of a rebel horse artillery along with important papers, after which he captured Stuart's headquarters with all his documents. Thus, he claimed to gain knowledge of Lee's plan for invading Pennsylvania. Well, the reality was that any information that he may have gained by capturing papers from both of those areas was already well known by the Union Bureau of Military Intelligence. Stuart will call it a victory, but as we saw in the outset, the newspaper saw it otherwise. Douglas Southall Freeman certainly sees it otherwise. But in any case, Lee was pretty happy that his intentions were not uncovered. So with that, I'd like to thank you for joining me tonight as we take a look at this important part of the Gettysburg campaign and the largest cavalry action in the entire American Civil War. And folks, the effort to continue to preserve the land goes on. So, if you're so inclined to make donations to the America Battlefield Trust, you can designate some of those funds to help out Brandy Station. But I appreciate you joining our Zoom and joining me tonight for this discussion.